The sound echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Metal meeting flesh. Books scattering across linoleum, a sharp cry of pain quickly muffled. Most students would have hurried past, pretending they didn't see, didn't hear, didn't know what Tyler Brennan and his crew were doing to the skinny freshman behind the gym equipment. But Marcus Chen wasn't most students. As he stood frozen in the doorway, watching Danny Foster try to gather his scattered notebooks while Tyler laughed with his friends, something cold and precise clicked into place in Marcus's mind. 3 years of training with his father echoed in his memory. Son, strength isn't about what you can do to someone. It's about what you choose not to do and when you choose to act anyway. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning air in Riverside, Ohio, carried the smell of burning leaves and teenage anxiety as Marcus Chen pulled his mother's Honda into the student parking lot of Riverside High School. The building loomed ahead like a brick fortress, its windows reflecting the gray sky in a way that made them look like watching eyes. He sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the trophy cases visible through the main entrance. Even from here, he could see the gleaming football helmets and championship banners that seemed to take up every inch of display space. His phone buzzed with a text from his father, currently stationed somewhere in Eastern Europe that Marcus wasn't supposed to know about. Remember what we practiced, son. Situational awareness. De-escalation first. But if someone weaker needs protection. The message ended there, but Marcus knew the rest. His father had drilled it into him since he was 12. A warrior's strength meant nothing if it wasn't used to shield those who couldn't shield themselves. Marcus stepped out of the car, shouldering his plain black backpack. He'd learned not to stand out in new schools. This was his 4th high school in 3 years, following his mother's nursing assignments and his father's deployments. Each move meant new bullies to navigate, new social hierarchies to decode, new reasons to keep his head down and his skills hidden. The other students flowing around him chattered about weekend parties and upcoming homecoming festivities, their voices carrying the easy confidence of people who'd never had to start over. The main office smelled like copy toner and disappointment. Behind the counter, a secretary with tired eyes and graying hair looked up from her computer screen. "You must be Marcus. I'm Mrs. Patterson. Dr. Williams is expecting you." She handed him a manila folder thick with forms and schedules. "Welcome to Riverside High, home of the Eagles." Her tone suggested she'd given this speech 10,000 times before. Dr. Patricia Williams emerged from her office like someone perpetually running 5 minutes late. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably early 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to apologize for something she hadn't done yet. "Marcus, welcome, welcome. I know moving in October isn't ideal, but we're going to make this transition as smooth as possible." She gestured for him to follow her into her office, which was decorated with motivational posters that looked like they'd been ordered from the same catalog as every other principal's office in America. "Your transcripts are impressive," Dr. Williams said, settling behind her desk. "Mostly A's, excellent standardized test scores. You'll fit right into our honors program." She pulled out a class schedule, printed on bright yellow paper. "I've got you an advanced placement history with Mr. Kim, honors English with Ms. Parker, and—" She paused, scanning the document. "It looks like Coach Miller requested you for second period PE. Apparently your physical fitness scores caught his attention." Marcus accepted the schedule, noting the way Dr. Williams's expression tightened slightly when she mentioned Coach Miller. There was something there, some tension she wasn't naming. "Is there anything I should know about the school? Any particular rules or expectations?" Dr. Williams's smile became more strained. "Riverside High values tradition and school spirit. We're very proud of our athletic programs, especially football. The team's having an exceptional season this year." She stood up, clearly signaling the end of their meeting. "Just remember, Marcus, high school can be challenging for transfer students. If you have any problems, any at all, my door is always open." The way she said it made Marcus think her door had been opened by a lot of students who left disappointed. Mrs. Patterson handed him a map of the school and assigned him a student guide. A nervous-looking sophomore named Kevin Thompson. who wore thick glasses and carried his books like he was afraid someone might try to take them. "First period is advanced placement history," Kevin said, leading Marcus through hallways that echoed with the sound of slamming lockers and morning conversations. "Mr. Kim's class. He's tough but fair. Used to be in the military himself, so he might like you." As they walked, Marcus cataloged the school's geography with the automatic precision his father had trained into him. Main hallway ran north-south, with 3 wings branching off like spokes. The trophy cases dominated the central commons area, filled with decades of football accomplishments and a few token academic awards tucked in the corners. Students moved in predictable patterns, clustering around lockers in groups that told their own stories about social hierarchies and unspoken rules. "That's Tyler Brennan," Kevin whispered, nodding toward a tall, broad-shouldered senior surrounded by a knot of admirers near the main trophy case. Tyler wore his Letterman jacket-like armor, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his laugh carrying across the commons with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Football captain. Pretty much runs the school." Marcus watched Tyler for a moment, noting the way other students either gravitated toward him or actively avoided him. There was something in Tyler's posture, the way he claimed space, that set off quiet alarms in Marcus's mind. He'd seen that particular brand of entitlement before, in the sons of officers who thought rank transferred through genetics. "What about him?" Marcus asked, nodding toward a lanky boy with dark hair who was struggling to close his overstuffed locker while juggling an armload of textbooks. Kevin's expression grew uncomfortable. "That's Danny Foster, freshman. Tyler and his friends think he's, entertaining." Kevin adjusted his glasses nervously. "Look, just some advice. Keep your head down around Tyler's crew. They don't like new kids who draw attention." Room 204 turned out to be in the West Wing, past a collection of faded posters advertising long-past school events. Mr. David Kim stood at the front of the classroom, a man in his 60s with silver hair and alert eyes that suggested he missed very little. When Marcus introduced himself, Mr. Kim's handshake was firm and his gaze lingered for a moment longer than casual politeness required. "Marcus Chen," Mr. Kim repeated thoughtfully. "Your father wouldn't happen to be Colonel James Chen, would he?" "Yes, sir. You know him?" Mr. Kim's smile was slight, but genuine. "We served in different branches, but paths cross in military circles. He's got a good reputation." He handed Marcus a textbook and gestured toward an empty desk. "We're covering the Korean conflict this week. I imagine you might have some insights." The class proceeded with discussions about Cold War politics and the complexities of international intervention. Marcus participated when called upon, but mostly observed his new classmates. There was Amy Rodriguez, a girl with sharp eyes and a reporter's notebook, who seemed to write down everything everyone said. Lisa Chang sat near the window, contributing thoughtful comments when Mr. Kim asked direct questions. Tommy Brooks, who used a wheelchair, had positioned himself strategically near the front where preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Leave him alone," Marcus said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler's expression shifted, the mock friendliness dropping away to reveal something colder underneath. "Excuse me?" "I said leave him alone." Marcus's voice stayed level, but he shifted his weight slightly, the way his father had taught him to do when de-escalation was about to become something else entirely. Tyler stepped closer, using his height advantage to tower over Marcus. "You know what, new guy? I think you might have the wrong idea about how things work around here. See, Danny and I have an understanding. Don't we, Danny?" Danny nodded frantically, tears starting to form in his eyes. "So maybe you should focus on minding your own business and let me handle mine." Coach Miller chose that moment to blow his whistle. All right, enough socializing. Let's run some drills." His tone suggested he'd been watching the entire exchange with approval rather than concern. As the class resumed its activities, Tyler brushed past Marcus, close enough to whisper, "Welcome to Riverside, hero. Hope you enjoy your stay." Lunch period found Marcus sitting alone in the cafeteria, observing the social ecosystem from a corner table with a clear view of the room's exits. The cafeteria was divided into invisible territories as rigid as any military installation. Football players commanded the center tables, cheerleaders clustered nearby like satellite states. Various academic and social clubs occupied the middle ground, and the outsiders pressed against the walls like refugees. Amy Rodriguez appeared with her lunch tray and slid into the seat across from him without invitation. "Mind if I join you? I hate eating alone, and you look like you could use some friendly conversation." "Sure," Marcus said, though he suspected Amy's motives were more journalistic than social. "So," Amy said, unwrapping a sandwich that looked homemade, "how was your first morning? Coach Miller's class can be pretty intense for new students." Marcus studied her face, wondering how much she'd already heard through the school's gossip network. "It was educational," Amy laughed. "That's a diplomatic way to put it. Let me guess Tyler Brennan gave you the welcome wagon treatment. Something like that." "Tyler's got this thing about new students," Amy said, her voice carefully neutral. "Especially ones who might upset the natural order. You seem like you might be the type to upset natural orders." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the center of the cafeteria. Tyler and his crew had surrounded Danny Foster's table, where the freshman sat alone with a brown bag lunch that suggested his family packed carefully to stretch every dollar. "What you got there, Danny?" Tyler's voice carried across the room with theatrical friendliness. "Let's see what Mom packed for her little boy today." Danny tried to pull his lunch closer, but Jake Morrison was already reaching across the table, grabbing the bag and dumping its contents out. A peanut butter sandwich, an apple that had seen better days, and a small bag of generic chips scattered across the table. "Oh, look at that," Connor Walsh said loudly. "Poor little Danny can't even afford brand-name chips." The cafeteria had gone quiet, students at nearby tables watching with the kind of fascination reserved for car accidents and public humiliation. Marcus felt Amy's eyes on him, gauging his reaction. "This is a daily thing," she said quietly. "Tyler calls it lunch tax. Danny gives up his food, or Tyler finds other ways to entertain himself." Marcus watched Danny's face crumple as Tyler deliberately stepped on his apple, grinding it into the floor with his heel. The freshman was crying now, but silently, the kind of tears that came from someone who'd learned that making noise only made things worse. "You gonna write about this?" Marcus asked Amy. Amy's expression was bitter. "I've tried. Principal Williams says it's just boys being boys. Coach Miller says it builds character. The newspaper faculty advisor says we need to focus on positive school spirit stories." She paused, watching Tyler flick crumbs at Danny's face. "So no, I'm not going to write about this. Not in any way that matters." Marcus stood up. "What are you doing?" Amy hissed. "Something stupid, probably." He walked across the cafeteria, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. Tyler looked up as he approached, his face breaking into a grin that held no warmth whatsoever. "Well, well, if it isn't the hero, come to save the day?" Marcus ignored Tyler entirely, focusing instead on Danny Foster. "You okay?" Danny looked up through his tears, confusion and hope warring in his expression. Yeah, I'm okay." "No, you're not," Marcus said gently. "But you will be." He knelt down and began gathering the scattered remains of Danny's lunch, salvaging what he could. The peanut butter sandwich was mostly intact, and the chip bag could be resealed. The apple was a loss, but Marcus had an orange in his own lunch that he could spare. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Tyler's voice had lost its performative friendliness. Marcus stood up slowly, handing the rescued food back to Danny. "I think I'm eating lunch with my friend here. Got a problem with that?" The challenge was unmistakable now. Around them, the cafeteria held its breath, sensing that something fundamental was about to shift. Tyler's crew closed ranks behind him. Jake Morrison with his linebacker's bulk, Connor Walsh with his rich kid's entitlement, Derek Santos with his desperate need to belong somewhere. "Yeah," Tyler said, stepping closer. "I've got a problem with that. See, you don't seem to understand the rules around here. Danny and I have an arrangement, and you're interfering with school traditions." "Funny," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the kind of calm that came before storms. "Where I come from, we call that bullying, and we handle bullies differently." Tyler's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Where you come from? Let me tell you something, Army brat. This isn't some military base where your daddy's rank gets you respect. This is my school, my town, my rules. And rule number 1 is you don't get to play hero. Marcus felt the familiar stillness settling over him, the way time seemed to slow when his father's training kicked in. He could see Tyler's tells, the way his right shoulder dropped slightly before he threw a punch, the telltale shift of weight that telegraphed his intentions. Around them, students were pulling out phones, sensing that whatever happened next would be worth recording. But Marcus also saw something else. Danny Foster, watching with desperate hope, Amy Rodriguez poised to document whatever came next, and dozens of other students who had learned to look away when someone needed help. This moment wasn't just about him and Tyler. It was about what kind of place Riverside High School was going to be. "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "This isn't a military base. But maybe it should be. Because on a military base, soldiers protect each other. They don't prey on the weak for entertainment." Tyler's face flushed red. "You think you're better than us? You think your Special Forces daddy makes you some kind of badass? Let me show you how things really work around here." He raised his hand. Whether to push Marcus or throw a punch, it didn't matter. Because in that instant, Marcus made a choice that would change everything that followed. Instead of stepping back or raising his own hands in defense, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and speaking in a voice that carried across the silent cafeteria. "Go ahead," he said. "Show everyone here exactly who you are." Tyler hesitated, his hand frozen in the air. Because suddenly, with Marcus standing close enough to touch, Tyler could see something in the new kid's eyes that he'd never encountered before. Someone who wasn't afraid of him. Someone who had been trained by people far more dangerous than a high school football captain. Someone who was giving him the choice to walk away while he still could. The moment stretched between them like a held breath. And Marcus realized that everything his father had taught him about strength and protection and choosing when to fight was about to be tested in ways that no training exercise had ever prepared him for. The tension in the cafeteria shattered like glass when Coach Miller's whistle pierced the air with 3 sharp blasts. "Enough!" his voice boomed across the silent room. "Everyone back to your seats. Now!" Tyler's raised hand slowly lowered, but his eyes never left Marcus's face. The moment hung between them like smoke before Tyler stepped back with a smile that promised this wasn't over. "Saved by the whistle, Army boy. How convenient." Marcus didn't respond, instead turning back to Danny Foster, who was still clutching the remains of his rescued lunch. "You good to finish eating?" Danny nodded wordlessly, but Marcus could see the tremor in his hands as he unwrapped his sandwich. Around them, conversations slowly resumed their normal volume, but the undercurrent of electricity remained. Students kept glancing toward their table, and Marcus noticed more than a few phones still recording discreetly. Coach Miller approached with heavy footsteps, his face red with what might have been anger or embarrassment. "Chen, Brennan, my office, now." The coach's office was a shrine to athletic achievement, walls covered with team photos dating back decades, and a trophy case that seemed to groan under the weight of its contents. Coach Miller settled behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver verdict, his weathered hands folded over a stomach that spoke of too many years away from active competition. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd given this speech many times before. "Riverside High School has a reputation to maintain. We pride ourselves on being a community where students support each other, where traditions matter, and where conflicts are resolved through proper channels." Tyler nodded earnestly, transforming his expression into something resembling remorse. "Coach Miller, I was just trying to help the new guy understand how things work here. Maybe I came on a little strong." Marcus watched this performance with clinical interest, recognizing the practiced nature of Tyler's contrition. This wasn't Tyler's first time in this office, and both he and Coach Miller seemed to be following a well-rehearsed script. "That's what I like to hear, Brennan. Leadership sometimes means adjusting your approach." Coach Miller's approval was evident as he turned toward Marcus. "Now, Chen, I understand you're still learning our school culture. Sometimes what looks like one thing from the outside is actually something else entirely. Tyler here is one of our finest student leaders. The boys look up to him, and he takes that responsibility seriously." Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the same one he'd experienced at previous schools when adults chose to see what was convenient rather than what was true. "I see. Good, good." Coach Miller's smile suggested he believed the matter was resolved. "Now, Tyler, You've got practice after school. I want you working with the younger players, showing them proper technique. Community service through mentorship. That's what builds character. Absolutely, Coach. I'll make sure the underclassmen understand what it means to be a Riverside Eagle. The dismissal was clear, but as they stood to leave, Coach Miller addressed Marcus one final time. Chen, I've looked at your fitness scores and academic records. Impressive stuff. How would you feel about trying out for the team? We could use someone with your background, and it might help you integrate better with your classmates. Tyler's expression flickered for just a moment. A micro-expression of displeasure quickly smoothed away. That's a great idea, Coach. I'd be happy to show Marcus the ropes. Thanks for the offer, Marcus replied carefully, but I'm more focused on academics right now. Coach Miller's disappointment was obvious. Well, keep it in mind. Nothing builds school spirit, like being part of the team. As they left the office, Tyler fell into step beside Marcus, his demeanor shifting to something that might have been mistaken for friendliness by a casual observer. You handled that pretty well, in there. Coach Miller likes students who show respect for authority. Seems like you've got plenty of experience with that conversation. Tyler's laugh was genuine this time. Fair point. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. This place has its rhythms, its traditions. Fight against them, and you'll have a miserable time. Work with them, he shrugged. Well, let's just say Riverside can be a great place for the right kind of student. They had reached the main hallway, where afternoon classes were about to begin. Students flowed around them in the practiced chaos of period changes, but Marcus noticed how many gave Tyler a wide berth, how conversations quieted when he passed. What about Danny Foster? Marcus asked. Where does he fit into these traditions? Tyler's expression hardened slightly. Danny's learning important life lessons about resilience and adaptation. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them figure things out for themselves. And if they can't figure it out, then maybe they weren't meant to succeed here. Tyler's voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned his own advantages. Look, Marcus, I'm trying to be straight with you because I respect what your father does for our country. But everyone has to find their place in the ecosystem. Some people are predators, some are prey. It's not personal, it's just nature. The second half of the school day passed in a blur of introductory lessons and social navigation. In advanced biology, Marcus found himself partnered with Lisa Chang, a quiet girl who seemed genuinely interested in helping him catch up on the material they'd covered before his arrival. She spoke softly, but with precision, walking him through cellular respiration diagrams with the patience of someone who understood what it felt like to be overlooked. Thanks for this, Marcus said as they worked through practice problems. I know getting stuck with the new kid isn't exactly exciting. Lisa glanced around nervously before responding. Actually, I volunteered. Miss Parker asked if anyone wanted to help you get oriented and she hesitated, then continued in an even quieter voice. I saw what happened in the cafeteria. It was brave. It was stupid. Maybe, Lisa agreed. But someone needed to do something stupid. Danny's a good kid. He doesn't deserve what Tyler puts him through. Marcus looked up from his textbook. You've seen this before? Lisa's expression became carefully neutral. Everyone's seen it. The question is whether anyone's going to do anything about it. In English class, Ms. Jennifer Parker proved to be exactly the kind of teacher Marcus had hoped to find at Riverside. She was probably in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes and the slightly harried appearance of someone who cared more about her students than her own convenience. Her classroom was a refuge of books and thoughtful discussion, posters promoting critical thinking and empathy covering walls that had probably once displayed more conventional academic motivations. We're starting a unit on moral courage in literature, Ms. Parker announced to the class. We'll be reading texts that explore what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous. Tommy Brooks, the student who used a wheelchair, raised his hand. Are we talking about heroes? Like in action movies? Ms. Parker smiled. That's exactly what we're going to examine, Tommy. The difference between Hollywood heroism and real moral courage. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is speak truth to power, even when you know there will be consequences. Amy Rodriguez, who Marcus was beginning to realize attended every class with the intensity of an investigative journalist, leaned forward in her seat, What about when the power structure doesn't want to hear the truth? What about when speaking up makes things worse for everyone? Excellent question, Amy. That's precisely the kind of complexity we'll be exploring. Moral courage isn't simple or easy. If it were, everyone would practice it. As the discussion continued, Marcus found himself thinking about the morning's events, about Tyler's casual assertion that some people were predators and others prey, about Coach Miller's willingness to see leadership where others might see intimidation. The classroom felt like a different world from the rest of the school, a place where difficult questions were encouraged rather than discouraged. After class, Miss Parker asked Marcus to stay behind. When the other students had filed out, she closed the door and turned to face him with an expression that suggested she'd been planning this conversation. "How was your first day, Marcus?" "Educational," he replied, unconsciously echoing his response to Amy at lunch. Miss Parker smiled wryly. "I imagine it was. Word travels fast in a school this size. I heard there was some excitement in the cafeteria." Marcus waited, unsure how much she knew or what her position might be on the incident. "I want you to know," Miss Parker continued, "that my classroom is a safe space. If you ever need to talk about anything, my door is open. And I mean that literally. I'm here until 5 most days, grading papers and preparing lessons." "Thanks. I appreciate that." Miss Parker hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Marcus, I'm going to share something with you that I probably shouldn't. This school has some wonderful students and dedicated teachers, but it also has some systemic problems that have been ignored for too long. Students like Danny Foster often fall through the cracks, and students like Tyler Brennan learn that their actions don't have consequences. Why are you telling me this? Because you're new, which means you don't have years of learned helplessness built up. And because your response in the cafeteria suggests you might be someone who refuses to accept that this is just how things are." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Change is hard, Marcus. It requires people willing to take risks, to challenge the status quo. But change is also necessary." As Marcus walked to his locker at the end of the day, he reflected on Miss Parker's words and their implications. The hallways were emptying as students headed to after-school activities or home. But the building still hummed with energy. He could hear the marching band practicing in the distance, the sound of basketballs echoing from the gymnasium, the normal soundtrack of American high school life. His locker was in the sophomore hallway, a location that had probably been assigned randomly but felt strategically unfortunate given the day's events. As he gathered his books, he became aware of voices approaching from around the corner. Tyler's voice, unmistakable in its confident cadence, along with the deeper tones of his usual companions. "Think he's some kind of tough guy because his daddy plays soldier," Tyler was saying. "But this isn't Afghanistan or wherever. This is Ohio, and Ohio has different rules." Marcus continued organizing his backpack, but his father's training kicked in automatically, cataloging exit routes and potential threats. The voices were getting closer. "Maybe we should back off for a while," a voice that sounded like Derek Santos suggested nervously. Coach Miller seemed pretty serious about keeping things calm. Tyler's laugh was sharp. "Coach Miller wants to win football games. As long as we're winning on Friday nights, he doesn't really care what happens Monday through Thursday. Trust me, I've been managing Coach Miller since I was a freshman." They rounded the corner then, Tyler leading his usual entourage of Jake Morrison, Connor Walsh, and Derek Santos. When Tyler saw Marcus at his locker, his expression shifted to one of pleasant surprise. "Marcus, perfect timing. We were just talking about you." Marcus closed his locker and turned to face them, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, absolutely. I was just telling the guys how impressed I was with your restraint earlier. Very mature, very disciplined. Your father's training really shows." The compliment felt like a trap, but Marcus couldn't identify the specific danger yet. "Thanks." Connor Walsh stepped forward, his expensive clothing and carefully styled hair marking him as the group's financial backer. "Tyler was thinking maybe you'd like to hang out with us sometime, get to know the social landscape better." "That's generous, but I'm still getting settled in." Of course," Tyler said smoothly. "No pressure at all. But maybe you could help us with something small. A gesture of goodwill between new friends." Jake Morrison moved slightly to Marcus's left, a positioning that seemed casual but effectively blocked the most direct route toward the main hallway. Derek Santos remained nervous, fidgeting with his car keys, but he'd moved to cover the opposite direction. "What kind of gesture?" Marcus asked. Tyler's smile widened. "Nothing dramatic. It's just that Danny Foster has been having some trouble lately. Academic trouble, social trouble, you know how it is. We thought maybe you could have a conversation with him. Explain how important it is for him to handle his own problems, instead of looking for outside help." The request was phrased reasonably, but Marcus understood the translation. Convince Danny not to report what happened, not to seek help, not to expect protection from anyone else. "I don't think Danny and I know each other well enough for that kind of conversation." Tyler's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "See, that's where I think you're wrong. Danny looked up to you today. He was grateful for your help. That gives you influence, responsibility even. And with responsibility comes the obligation to give good advice." "What kind of advice did you have in mind?" "Simple stuff. How sometimes the best way to handle a difficult situation is to accept it and move on. How making a big deal out of minor social interactions can blow things out of proportion. How involving adults in student matters usually makes things worse for everyone." The hallway had emptied completely now, leaving just the five of them in a space that suddenly felt much smaller than it had moments before. Marcus realized this wasn't a chance encounter. Tyler had planned this conversation, chosen this location, assembled his crew for a specific purpose. "And if Danny doesn't take this advice well," Tyler shrugged, "then I guess he'll learn the hard way that actions have consequences." See, Marcus, the thing about being new is that you don't understand the relationships that have developed over time. Danny and I have history. My friends and I have invested years in helping him build character, teaching him resilience. One day of hero complex doesn't undo all that educational progress. The threat was clear now, wrapped in reasonable language but unmistakable in its intent. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the way his father's training prepared his body for conflict, even as his mind worked through alternatives. "I think I'll let Danny make his own decisions about how to handle his problems." Tyler's facade of friendliness finally cracked. "That would be a mistake, Marcus. A big one. Because see, the thing about being the new guy is that you need friends. You need allies. You need people who can help you understand how things work around here." He stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space in a way that was clearly deliberate. "And the thing about being stubborn, about thinking you know better than people who've been here for years, is that it tends to make you enemies. And enemies have a way of making life very, very difficult." Connor Walsh pulled out his phone, ostensibly checking messages but positioning it in a way that could capture video if needed. Jake Morrison cracked his knuckles, a sound that echoed off the empty lockers like gunshots. Derek Santos looked increasingly uncomfortable but showed no signs of backing down. Marcus thought about his father's lessons on de-escalation, about choosing battles wisely, about the difference between tactical retreat and cowardice. He also thought about Danny Foster's tears, about Ms. Parker's talk of moral courage, about the choice between being someone who watched injustice happen and someone who stood against it. "Tyler," he said quietly, "I think we understand each other perfectly, and I think you understand that I'm not going to be having that conversation with Danny." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Tyler's jaw clenched, and for a moment Marcus thought the situation might escalate into physical confrontation right there in the empty hallway. But then Tyler smiled again, an expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "You know what, Marcus? I respect that. I really do. A man's got to stand by his principles, even when they're going to cost him everything he cares about." Tyler stepped back, giving Marcus room to breathe, but somehow making the space feel more threatening rather than less. "But here's the thing about principles. They're a luxury you can only afford when you don't have anything to lose. And everyone eventually finds something they can't afford to lose." Tyler turned and walked away then, his crew falling into formation behind him like a military unit. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway until they disappeared around the corner, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that his first day at Riverside High School had established battle lines that would define everything that followed. As he walked toward the parking lot, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his father, sent from whatever classified location he was currently defending American interests. "How was the first day, son? Making friends already?" Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before typing his response. "Learning the lay of the land. Some interesting characters here. Remember what I taught you about reading people and situations. Trust your instincts, but think 3 moves ahead. Copy that, Dad." Marcus pocketed his phone and continued toward his mother's Honda. But his father's words echoed in his mind. Think 3 moves ahead. Tyler Brennan was clearly thinking several moves ahead. Building alliances, establishing consequences, creating a situation where Marcus would be forced to choose between his own safety and his willingness to protect others. The October air was crisp as he drove home through Riverside's quiet streets, past houses with American flags and yellow ribbon magnets, past the VA office where families waited for news from overseas, past the Memorial Park where bronze soldiers stood eternal guard over the names of local heroes. This was supposed to be the kind of community that his father fought to protect, the kind of place where values like honor and courage and protecting the innocent still meant something. But Marcus was beginning to understand that every community had its own internal wars, its own systems of oppression and resistance, its own tests of character that couldn't be won with superior firepower or tactical training. The skills his father had taught him were valuable, but they would only be as effective as his willingness to use them in service of something larger than his own survival. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus made a mental note to check on Danny Foster tomorrow, to pay attention to how the other students treated him, to watch for signs that Tyler's educational program was escalating in response to the day's events. Because if there was one thing his father's training had taught him above all else, it was that bullies never stopped until someone made them stop. And someone, it appeared, was going to have to be him. Dr. Williams's office felt smaller during the lunch meeting, the motivational posters and academic achievement certificates seeming to close in, like evidence of good intentions gone astray. Marcus sat across from the principal's desk while she reviewed a manila folder thick with printed social media screenshots and handwritten complaint forms. "Marcus, I want to start by saying that transitioning to a new school is never easy," Dr. Williams began, her tone carefully calibrated between concern and authority. "Sometimes students feel pressure to establish themselves quickly, to make an impression that might not reflect their true character." Marcus waited, recognizing the opening gambit of an interrogation disguised as guidance counseling. His father had taught him that the most dangerous conversations often began with expressions of understanding and support. "Several students have expressed concerns about interactions they've had with you since your arrival. Now, I'm not saying these concerns are valid, but I do need to address them." Dr. Williams opened the folder and spread several printed screenshots across her desk. "These social media posts suggest that some students feel intimidated by your behavior." The posts were the ones Amy had shown him that morning, but seeing them arranged formally on the principal's desk gave them additional weight. Connor Walsh's description of feeling threatened. Derek Santos's concerns about school safety. Even a post from a girl Marcus didn't recognize, claiming he'd stared at her aggressively in the hallway. "Dr. Williams, have you verified any of these claims? Checked security footage, interviewed witnesses, gathered any corroborating evidence?" The principal's expression tightened slightly. "Marcus, I appreciate your desire for due process, but my job is to maintain a safe learning environment for all students. When multiple students express similar concerns, I have to take those concerns seriously. What specific actions am I being accused of?" Dr. Williams consulted her notes. "Aggressive posturing in the gymnasium during PE class. Confrontational behavior in the cafeteria. Intimidating communication in the hallways. General attitude and demeanor that makes other students uncomfortable." Marcus processed this carefully. Every accusation was vague enough to be unprovable but specific enough to sound credible. Tyler had constructed a narrative that transformed Marcus's protection of Danny Foster into aggressive behavior, his refusal to be intimidated into intimidating others. "Dr. Williams, has Danny Foster filed any complaints about my behavior?" "Danny Foster?" The principal seemed surprised by the question. "No, Danny hasn't filed any complaints. Why do you ask?" "Because he was the student I was allegedly intimidating in the cafeteria. If I was being aggressive toward him, wouldn't he be the one expressing concerns?" Dr. Williams shuffled through her papers, clearly not having considered this logical inconsistency. Well, sometimes victims of intimidation are afraid to come forward. They might fear retaliation or further harassment. Have you asked Danny directly about his perspective on what happened? I don't think that's necessary at this point. The concerns come from students who witnessed the incident, not necessarily the participants. Marcus understood now that this meeting wasn't about gathering facts or determining truth. It was about establishing a paper trail that would justify future disciplinary action if Tyler's campaign escalated to the point where the administration needed to take sides. Dr. Williams, I'd like to formally request that you review security footage from the cafeteria incident yesterday. I believe that footage will show my actual behavior, not the interpreted version being presented in these social media posts. The principal's discomfort was visible now. Marcus, I'm not sure that level of investigation is warranted for what amounts to a social misunderstanding between students. So multiple students expressing concerns about my behavior warrants a formal meeting, but reviewing objective evidence doesn't warrant basic investigation. Dr. Williams closed the folder with a snap that suggested the meeting was reaching its conclusion. Marcus, I'm going to be very direct with you. Riverside High School has a certain culture, certain expectations about how students interact with each other. Students who work within that culture tend to have positive experiences here. Students who fight against it often find themselves isolated and unhappy. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Conform to Tyler's version of school culture, or face increasing administrative pressure disguised as concern for the community's well-being. I understand perfectly, Marcus replied. And I want to assure you that I have no intention of fighting against positive school culture. I'm only interested in protecting students who need protection and standing up for what's right. I hope that's true. But Marcus, sometimes what seems right to one person can seem very wrong to others. I'd encourage you to consider the perspectives of students who've been here longer, who understand our traditions and values. As Marcus left the principal's office, he realized that Tyler's psychological warfare had achieved its primary objective. The administration was now actively discouraging him from defending Danny Foster, framing his moral courage as social maladjustment and potential threat to school harmony. The afternoon passed in a haze of classes where Marcus felt increasingly isolated. Students who had seemed friendly the day before now maintained careful distance. Teachers who had welcomed him warmly now watched him with subtle wariness. Tyler's information campaign was working exactly as designed, creating an atmosphere where Marcus appeared to be the problem rather than someone trying to solve a problem. In chemistry class, Marcus found himself partnered with Lisa Chang again, but her demeanor had shifted noticeably. She was polite, but distant, focused intently on their laboratory assignment without the easy conversation they'd shared previously. Lisa, is everything okay? Marcus asked quietly while they waited for their solution to heat. She glanced around nervously before responding. My parents heard some things about you. They're concerned about me being associated with students who might have behavioral issues. What kind of things did they hear? That you have anger management problems because of your military background. That you've been threatening other students. That your family moves around a lot because you get in trouble at schools. Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. I told them that didn't seem right based on what I'd observed, but they said sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem normal at first. Marcus felt a cold recognition of Tyler's strategy expanding beyond the school itself. The social media campaign wasn't just targeting students, it was reaching parents, spreading through the community's informal communication networks like a carefully designed virus. Lisa, do you believe those things about me? She was quiet for a long moment, measuring chemicals with unnecessary precision. I think you're probably a good person who's trying to do the right thing. But I also think you don't understand how things work here, and that might make you dangerous even if you don't mean to be. After school, Marcus found Amy Rodriguez waiting by his car in the student parking lot. Her usually confident demeanor seemed shaken, and she kept glancing toward the school building as if expecting surveillance. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Tyler's escalating faster than I expected. She handed Marcus her phone, which displayed a group text conversation she'd apparently been added to without her consent. The chat was titled Concerned Students and included a dozen participants discussing Marcus's threatening behavior and the need to protect our school community. The messages were sophisticated in their manipulation, mixing legitimate safety concerns with subtle character assassination. Someone had shared a Wikipedia article about violence among military families. Another participant discussed the importance of reporting suspicious behavior to authorities. A third suggested that Marcus's obsession with Danny Foster might indicate predatory tendencies. "Amy, how did you get added to this group?" "I think someone's testing me, seeing whether I'll participate in the narrative they're building, or if I'll defend you." Amy took back her phone and scrolled through more messages. "Look at this." A new message had appeared while they were talking. "Amy Rodriguez has inside knowledge about the new student's behavior. Maybe she should share what she knows." "They're trying to force me to either join their campaign or become a target myself," Amy realized. "If I defend you, they'll say I'm covering for dangerous behavior. If I stay silent, they'll say my silence is suspicious." Marcus recognized the tactical elegance of the maneuver. Tyler was systematically isolating potential allies by making neutrality impossible. Everyone would be forced to choose sides, and choosing Marcus's side would require accepting social and potentially academic consequences. "Amy, I need you to do something that might feel counterintuitive." "What?" "I need you to participate in that group chat. Not to attack me, but to ask reasonable questions that expose the lack of evidence behind their claims. Be the voice of due process and rational thinking." Amy stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to pretend to be on their side?" "I want you to be exactly who you are, a journalist who values facts over rumors. Ask for specifics. Request evidence. Point out logical inconsistencies. Make them work harder to maintain their narrative." Amy considered this strategy, her reporter's instincts clearly recognizing its potential effectiveness. "That's actually brilliant. If I can get them to make increasingly extreme claims while demanding evidence they can't provide, I can document the entire disinformation campaign." As Amy drove away to begin her counterintelligence operation, Marcus remained in the parking lot, processing the day's revelations and planning his next moves. Tyler's campaign was more sophisticated than he'd initially recognized, but sophistication created vulnerabilities. The more elaborate a deception became, the more points of failure it contained. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Working late tonight. Leftovers in fridge. How was your day?" Marcus stared at the message, wondering how to encapsulate the complexity of psychological warfare in a response that wouldn't worry her unnecessarily. Learning a lot about strategic thinking. Tyler Brennan is more formidable than I initially assessed. Dr. Chen's response came quickly. "Formidable opponents often defeat themselves through overconfidence. Be patient. Document everything. Stay true to your principles." The drive home took Marcus through downtown Riverside, past the VA office where a small crowd had gathered for what appeared to be a support group meeting. Through the windows, he could see veterans of various ages sharing stories and offering mutual support. The scene reminded him of his father's frequent observation that the most important battles were often fought by people whose courage would never be recognized with medals or parades. At home, Marcus settled at his kitchen table with a notebook and began mapping Tyler's network of influence. At the center sat Tyler himself, surrounded by his core crew of Jake Morrison, Connor Walsh, and Derek Santos. Radiating outward were the athletes who deferred to Tyler's leadership, the students who feared becoming targets, the parents who believed Tyler's family reputation, and the school staff who prioritized harmony over justice. But Marcus also identified potential points of leverage. Ms. Parker seemed genuinely committed to moral courage and critical thinking. Mr. Kim had military experience that might make him sympathetic to principled stands against injustice. Amy Rodriguez possessed journalistic skills and access to information. Even Dr. Williams, despite her institutional blindness, claimed to value student safety and well-being. The key was finding ways to make Tyler's behavior impossible to ignore or rationalize. That would require evidence so compelling and public that the systems protecting him would become liabilities rather than assets. Marcus's laptop chimed with an encrypted video call from his father. Colonel Chen appeared on screen wearing fatigues and sitting in what looked like a briefing room, maps and tactical displays visible in the background. "Son, your mother forwarded me some interesting information about your school situation. Sounds like you're dealing with a complex adversary. Tyler Brennan is running a sophisticated influence operation. He's got institutional protection, community support, and enough intelligence about my background to craft targeted psychological attacks. Colonel Chen nodded approvingly. Good assessment. You're thinking strategically rather than just tactically. What's your operational objective? Marcus considered the question seriously. Initially, it was just protecting Danny Foster. But I'm realizing that won't be sufficient. Tyler will just move to other targets, and the system that enables him will remain intact. So what's your revised objective? Complete exposure of Tyler's network and methods. Not just stopping him, but changing the culture that allows people like him to operate with impunity. His father smiled with obvious pride. That's thinking like a leader, rather than just a warrior. But son, you need to understand that cultural change operations are the most difficult and dangerous missions. They require absolute commitment, because halfway measures often make things worse rather than better. I understand, Dad. But someone has to do it. Yes, they do. And sometimes that someone is a 17-year-old with military training and a moral compass that won't let him walk away from injustice. Colonel Chen's expression grew more serious. But Marcus, promise me you'll remember everything I taught you about rules of engagement. Use the minimum force necessary to achieve your objectives. Protect civilians. And never let anger or personal feelings drive your decision-making. The call ended with mutual expressions of love and respect, but Marcus found himself staring at his reflection in the laptop's dark screen. His father was right about the difficulty and danger of what he was attempting. Tyler Brennan had spent years building his position of power, and he wouldn't surrender it without escalating to whatever level of conflict was necessary to maintain control. Marcus opened a new document on his laptop and began typing a detailed account of every interaction he'd had with Tyler and his crew. The document would serve multiple purposes: evidence for potential future legal or disciplinary action, a training manual for other students facing similar situations, and a historical record of what happened when someone finally decided to fight back against systematic bullying. As he wrote, Marcus realized that his story was already becoming larger than just his personal conflict with Tyler Brennan. Students at other schools faced similar situations. Military families at other bases dealt with comparable power dynamics. Communities across the country struggled with institutions that protected bullies while silencing victims. His phone buzzed with a text from Amy. Group chat is heating up. Tyler's crew is making increasingly specific accusations, but they're also making mistakes. I'm getting everything documented. A second text arrived from an unknown number. Nice meeting today with Dr. Williams. Hope you learned something useful about how things work around here. Sleep well. T. The message was Tyler's way of demonstrating that he had intelligence sources throughout the school, that he knew about Marcus's disciplinary meeting, and wanted him to understand that his reach extended into supposedly confidential administrative processes. Marcus smiled as he typed his response. Learning a lot. Thanks for the educational opportunities. Looking forward to tomorrow's lessons. The psychological warfare was escalating exactly as Amy had predicted, but Marcus felt ready for whatever Tyler planned next. His father had taught him that the most dangerous moment in any conflict was when your opponent realized they were losing and decided to risk everything on a desperate final gambit. That moment was approaching fast, and when it arrived, Marcus intended to be ready. The house settled into evening quiet around him as Marcus continued documenting and planning, preparing for a battle that would test everything his father had taught him about courage, strategy, and the price of standing up for what was right. Outside his window, Riverside slept peacefully, unaware that one of its high schools was about to become a battleground where the future of its community's values would be decided by the actions of a few determined individuals. Marcus closed his laptop and prepared for bed, but his mind remained active, processing possibilities and contingencies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Tyler would escalate because his psychology demanded it, and his past success suggested it would work. But Marcus had something Tyler had never encountered before. Someone willing to match his strategic thinking with superior moral purpose and the training to see it through to victory. The real battle was just beginning, and Marcus Chen was ready to fight it on terms that Tyler Brennan had never imagined possible. The morning of October 15th arrived with the kind of ominous stillness that precedes storms, the gray Ohio sky hanging low over Riverside like a canvas, waiting for something dramatic to unfold across its surface. Marcus Chen's internal clock woke him at precisely 5:15 a.m., the same time his father had trained him to rise regardless of circumstances or location. But this morning felt different, charged with an electric potential that made the air itself seem heavier. As Marcus moved through his pre-dawn routine, he noticed his mother was already gone, called in early for an emergency surgery that would keep her at Riverside General Hospital until late evening. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, written in the careful handwriting that marked all her communications. Marcus, whatever happens today, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Your father and I are proud of the man you're becoming. Stay safe, stay smart, and stay true to your principles. Love, Mom. Attached to the note was a business card for Detective Sarah Martinez, a contact Dr. Chen had apparently cultivated through her work at the hospital. The implication was clear. If things escalated beyond the school's ability to handle them properly, Marcus would have allies in law enforcement who understood the difference between justice and institutional convenience. The drive to school took Marcus through a riverside that seemed suspended between its idealized self-image and its emerging reality. American flags still flew from every government building and half the residential porches, but he'd begun to notice details that spoke to deeper complexities. The VA office had a line of veterans waiting before it officially opened, their faces carrying the weight of battles that extended far beyond foreign soil. The Memorial Park's bronze soldiers stood guard over names that included too many young casualties from recent conflicts, reminders that the price of freedom was paid by real families in real communities like this one. Riverside High School's parking lot was already bustling with unusual early morning activity when Marcus arrived at 7 a.m. Students who normally struggled to arrive before the first bell were clustered in animated conversations, their body language suggesting something significant had occurred during the night. The energy was different from typical teenage social drama, more focused and intense, like the atmosphere of a military base when intelligence reports suggested incoming action. Kevin Thompson materialized beside Marcus's Honda before he'd even turned off the engine, his normally nervous demeanor amplified to near panic levels. "Marcus, you need to see this immediately," he said, thrusting his phone through the driver's side window with hands that shook slightly. Everything changed last night. The screen displayed a video that had apparently been circulating since the earliest hours of the morning. The timestamp showed 12:47 a.m., and the footage was clearly shot using night vision capabilities that suggested professional equipment rather than casual student recording. What Marcus saw made his blood run cold with a mixture of rage and tactical clarity. Danny Foster's locker had been systematically destroyed in a manner that went far beyond simple vandalism. The metal door hung open like a wound, its surface covered with spray-painted words that represented the worst kind of targeted harassment. But the destruction inside was even more devastating, clearly designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on someone who already had very little to lose. Danny's textbooks had been torn apart page by page, their contents scattered across the hallway floor like confetti, celebrating his humiliation. Personal photographs that had decorated the inside of his locker were destroyed with surgical precision, faces scratched out with such deliberate malice that it spoke to hours of planning rather than impulsive destruction. His few possessions that had made the sterile school environment feel more personal were broken, bent, or covered with substances that would require professional cleaning to remove. But what made Marcus's jaw clench with barely controlled fury was the systematic nature of the destruction. This wasn't random violence or even typical bullying escalation. Someone had studied Danny's vulnerabilities, identified what he valued most, and crafted an attack designed to break him psychologically in ways that physical violence could never accomplish. "Kevin, who shot this video?" "That's the thing," Kevin replied, his voice dropping to a whisper despite the early hour and relative privacy. "Nobody knows. It was posted from an anonymous account that disappeared as soon as the video started circulating." "But Marcus, look at the angle. Look at the quality. Whoever filmed this had access to the building after hours and professional equipment." Marcus studied the footage more carefully, his father's training automatically analyzing technical details that casual observers might miss. The camera work was steady and professional, suggesting either a tripod or someone with significant experience in low-light recording. The angle captured the destruction from multiple perspectives, indicating the person had moved through the hallway deliberately and without fear of being caught. This wasn't just Tyler and his crew with spray paint and teenage anger, Marcus observed. This was planned by someone with resources and access. Kevin nodded grimly. There's more. Look at this. He swiped to a second video, this one shot from a different angle and timestamp of 1:23 a.m. The footage showed the same hallway, but now included audio of multiple voices coordinating the destruction. The sound quality was excellent, clear enough to identify individual speakers even though their faces remained off camera. Make sure you get the photos. A voice that sounded unmistakably like Connor Walsh directed. Those are the things that matter to him most. Should we write something on the walls too? Derek Santos asked, his tone suggesting nervousness about the escalating scope of their operation. No. Tyler Brennan's voice came through clearly, carrying the authority of someone directing a military operation. We stick to the plan. Systematic destruction of his personal property, maximum psychological impact. No evidence that traces back to us. The video continued for several more minutes, documenting not just the vandalism itself but the careful planning and execution that had gone into the attack. Someone had provided them with a combination to Danny's locker, given them access to the building after hours, and supplied professional recording equipment to document their work. Kevin, has Danny seen this yet? He got to school about 20 minutes ago. Someone sent him the video anonymously, probably the same person who shot it. Marcus, I've never seen anyone look so broken. He's in the library right now, and I don't think he's planning to stay long. Marcus felt the familiar stillness settling over him, the way his father's training prepared his mind and body for combat situations. But this wasn't about physical confrontation anymore. Tyler Brennan had escalated to psychological warfare that required a strategic response rather than tactical reaction. Kevin, I need you to do something for me. Find Ms. Parker and show her these videos. Tell her I specifically requested that she document everything for potential legal proceedings. Then I need you to find Amy Rodriguez and tell her that Tyler just made the biggest mistake of his life. What are you going to do? What I should have done from the beginning. But first, I need to check on Danny. The library at 7:30 a.m. was a sanctuary of morning quiet, with Mrs. Henderson arranging returned books and preparing for another day of managing student research needs and social dynamics. Marcus found Danny Foster in the back corner, the same location where he'd retreated during their previous conversation, but his posture now spoke to a level of defeat that went beyond anything Marcus had previously witnessed. Danny sat hunched over a table with his head buried in his arms, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs that suggested he'd been crying for hours. Scattered around him were printouts of the videos, apparently sent to his email, along with messages from anonymous accounts that Marcus could only imagine were designed to maximize his humiliation and despair. Danny, Marcus said softly, approaching with the careful movements his father had taught him for dealing with traumatized civilians in combat zones. I saw what happened to your locker. Danny looked up with eyes that held no hope, only the dull acceptance of someone who'd learned that fighting back only invited worse punishment. His face was pale and drawn, marked by exhaustion that suggested he'd spent the night anticipating exactly this kind of escalation. It doesn't matter anymore, Danny whispered, his voice barely audible even in the library's quiet atmosphere. My mom already called the school this morning. She's looking into homeschooling options, maybe online high school. We can't afford to move to a different district, but we can't afford for this to continue either. Marcus settled into the chair across from Danny, his expression carrying the same focused intensity his father used when delivering crucial mission briefings to soldiers facing impossible odds. Danny, before you make any permanent decisions, I need you to understand something about how warfare really works. This isn't warfare, Marcus. This is just high school, and I'm not strong enough to survive it. You're wrong about both of those things. This absolutely is warfare, Danny. Tyler Brennan is conducting a systematic campaign designed to destroy your psychological resistance and force you to surrender territory you have every right to defend. And you're much stronger than you realize, because you're still here, still fighting, even when surrender would be easier. Danny studied Marcus's face, searching for something he could believe in beyond the evidence of his own powerlessness. What do you mean about warfare? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Danny the videos Kevin had shared. But this time, he analyzed them from a military intelligence perspective, rather than simply documenting the destruction. Look at the planning that went into this operation. Multiple personnel, professional equipment, detailed knowledge of your vulnerabilities, access to secure facilities. This wasn't just teenage bullying, Danny. This was a coordinated psychological attack designed to break your will to resist. So what does that mean? It means Tyler sees you as enough of a threat that he's willing to risk significant resources and potential criminal charges to neutralize you. It means your resistance is working, even though it doesn't feel that way right now. And it means he's just made himself vulnerable in ways he doesn't understand yet. Marcus opened a new video on his phone, this one recorded the night before using security camera footage his mother had helped him access through her hospital connections with local law enforcement. The timestamp showed 11:45 p.m., more than an hour before Tyler's crew had entered the building, and it revealed something that changed everything about the situation. Danny, watch this carefully. This footage shows someone disabling the school's security system and unlocking doors from the inside. Someone with administrative access and detailed knowledge of the building's layout. Tyler didn't just plan this operation, he had inside help from adults who should have been protecting you instead of enabling your harassment. Danny's expression shifted from despair to something approaching anger as the implications became clear. You mean teachers or administrators helped them do this? I mean, someone with keys and security codes provided access that allowed Tyler's crew to operate for over an hour inside the building, without triggering any alarms or security responses. Someone who knew exactly which cameras to avoid and which routes to take to minimize evidence. The revelation transformed Danny's understanding of his situation, from personal failure to institutional betrayal. He wasn't just being bullied by fellow students, he was being systematically targeted by a conspiracy that included adults who were supposed to ensure his safety and well-being. Marcus, what do I do with this information? You help me use it to expose everything. But Danny, I need you to understand that this is going to get worse before it gets better. Tyler's going to escalate because his psychology demands it, and he's going to try to discredit both of us before we can present evidence of what's really been happening here. Danny was quiet for a long moment, processing the choice between surrender and resistance, between the temporary safety of withdrawal and the potential justice of standing his ground. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strength that Marcus recognized as the emergence of genuine courage. What do you need me to do? The first confrontation of the day came during second period PE, when Coach Miller announced that the class would be participating in what he called team-building exercises that were clearly designed to create opportunities for Tyler's crew to isolate and target both Marcus and Danny in ways that could be dismissed as accidental contact during athletic activities. Today we're focusing on physical conditioning and conflict resolution through competitive sports, Coach Miller announced to the assembled students, his tone carrying the false enthusiasm of someone reading from a script he didn't particularly believe. I want everyone to remember that athletic competition teaches us valuable lessons about hierarchy, leadership, and accepting our natural roles within group dynamics. Marcus recognized the coded language immediately. Coach Miller was essentially giving Tyler permission to use physical intimidation under the guise of normal PE activities, creating plausible deniability for whatever harassment might occur during the class period. The gymnasium had been arranged for what appeared to be a modified version of dodgeball, but the teams were suspiciously unbalanced. Tyler's core crew of Jake Morrison, Connor Walsh, and Derek Santos were all placed on the same side, along with other football players and students who clearly owed them social allegiance. Marcus and Danny found themselves on the opposing team with a collection of students who seemed more interested in avoiding conflict than engaging in competitive athletics. Rules are simple, Coach Miller explained, though Marcus suspected the actual rules would be considerably more complex than whatever was officially announced. Standard dodgeball format, but I want to see strategic thinking and teamwork. Remember, this is about learning to work within established social structures and accepting leadership from students who've proven their ability to succeed. The message was unmistakable. Tyler was being positioned as the natural leader whose authority should be accepted without question, while students like Danny were expected to accept their subordinate roles in the school's social hierarchy. As the game began, Marcus immediately recognized that this wasn't about dodgeball at all. Tyler's team focused their attacks exclusively on Danny, ignoring other easier targets in favor of systematically terrorizing the freshman with rubber balls thrown with unnecessary force and precision. Danny tried to avoid the onslaught, but the gymnasium's layout made escape impossible, and his teammates offered no protection or support. "Come on, Danny!" Tyler called out with mock encouragement as he hurled a ball that struck the freshman in the shoulder hard enough to spin him around. "Show some fighting spirit! Don't just run away from every challenge. The other students laughed on cue, but Marcus noticed that several seemed uncomfortable with the obvious targeting and excessive force being used against someone who posed no competitive threat. This wasn't athletic competition. It was public humiliation disguised as team sports. When Tyler wound up for another throw that was clearly aimed at Danny's head rather than his torso, Marcus moved with the fluid precision his father had drilled into him through years of training. He intercepted the ball mid-flight with a catch that demonstrated reflexes and coordination far superior to anything Tyler's crew possessed, then immediately redirected his throw toward Tyler with just enough force to make a point without causing actual injury. The ball struck Tyler's center mass with a satisfying thud that echoed throughout the gymnasium, officially eliminating him from the game according to the rules Coach Miller had announced. But instead of accepting his elimination gracefully, Tyler remained on the court and signaled for his teammates to intensify their attacks on both Marcus and Danny. Interesting interpretation of the rules, Marcus observed loud enough for the entire class to hear. I thought elimination meant leaving the playing field, not calling for revenge attacks against whoever eliminated you. Coach Miller's whistle remained conspicuously silent despite the obvious rule violation, confirming Marcus's suspicion that the game's actual purpose had nothing to do with athletic competition or fair play. This was a sanctioned opportunity for Tyler to demonstrate his power while making any resistance appear unsportsmanlike or inappropriate. "You got lucky with that catch, Army boy," Tyler said, his voice carrying across the gymnasium with obvious threat. "But luck doesn't last forever, and neither does Daddy's protection." Marcus felt the familiar cold focus settling over him as he recognized Tyler's attempt to provoke an emotional response that could be used to justify escalation. His father had taught him to identify these psychological pressure points and respond with tactical thinking rather than reactive anger. "Tyler, I notice you're still on the court despite being eliminated according to Coach Miller's rules. Are you having trouble understanding simple instructions, or do the rules just not apply to you?" The question was delivered with matter-of-fact curiosity rather than aggression, but its implications were clear to everyone present. Tyler was publicly violating the game's rules while Coach Miller looked on with apparent approval, demonstrating the institutional protection that enabled his behavior throughout the school. Connor Walsh attempted to defuse the situation by throwing a ball at Marcus with enough force to cause real injury if it connected, but Marcus's training made such attacks look clumsy and desperate rather than threatening. He avoided the throw with minimal movement, caught the ball on its return bounce, and immediately eliminated Connor with a precision throw that left no doubt about his superior athletic ability. "Fascinating," Marcus said conversationally as Connor remained on the court despite his clear elimination. "It seems like the rules are more of a suggestion than an actual framework for fair competition." Amy Rodriguez, who had been assigned to document PE classes for the school newspaper, captured every moment of the exchange with her phone camera. Her footage would later show Tyler's crew openly cheating while Coach Miller not only allowed, but encouraged their rule violations through his conspicuous inaction. By the end of the class period, the score was irrelevant compared to the demonstration that had occurred. Tyler's team had been systematically outplayed by Marcus's superior training and tactical thinking, but, more importantly, their cheating and rule violations had been thoroughly documented by multiple witnesses with recording equipment. "Interesting class," Marcus said to Coach Miller as students filed toward the locker rooms. "Very educational about how rules are applied differently to different students." Coach Miller's expression suggested he understood the implications of what had just occurred, but his response confirmed his continued allegiance to Tyler's version of school hierarchy. Sometimes rules need to be interpreted flexibly to account for complex social dynamics, Chen. Students who understand that tend to have easier experiences here. "I appreciate the clarification, Coach Miller. It's helpful to understand the school's actual policies rather than just the ones that are written down." The locker room provided Tyler with an opportunity for more direct intimidation without the oversight of cameras or witnesses. As Marcus changed out of his PE clothes, Tyler's crew surrounded his area with the casual positioning that suggested long practice in this kind of psychological warfare. "You think you're smart, don't you, Army boy?" Tyler said, his voice echoing off the tile walls in a way that made his words seem more threatening. "You think your little demonstration out there proved something important." Marcus continued dressing with deliberate calm, refusing to be rushed or intimidated by their positioning. "I think it demonstrated exactly what I intended it to demonstrate, Tyler. The question is whether you understand what that was." Jake Morrison stepped closer, using his size advantage to loom over Marcus in a gesture that was clearly designed to provoke a physical response. Maybe you need a clearer demonstration of how things work around here. Maybe you need to think more carefully about the consequences of escalation, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the same deadly calm his father used when delivering ultimatums to insurgents who had pushed tactical situations beyond acceptable limits. Connor Walsh pulled out his phone ostensibly to check messages but actually positioning it to record whatever confrontation might develop. Marcus recognized the setup immediately. They were trying to provoke him into a physical response that could be filmed and used as evidence of his aggressive behavior. "You know what your problem is, Marcus?" Tyler said, moving closer until he was violating personal space in a way that was clearly deliberate. "You think rules apply to everyone equally. But that's not how the real world works. Some people make the rules, some people enforce the rules, and some people just follow them or get crushed." Marcus finished tying his shoes and stood up slowly, his movement calculated to demonstrate complete control rather than any hint of intimidation or fear. "Tyler, you're absolutely right about how the real world works. Some people do make the rules, some people do enforce them, and some people do get crushed when they refuse to follow them. The question is which category you think you belong in." The exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Kim, who had apparently been asked by Amy Rodriguez to check on potential confrontations developing in the locker room. His timing was perfect, arriving just as the situation was approaching a critical point where words might escalate to physical contact. "Gentlemen," Mr. Kim said with the authority of someone who had dealt with hostile situations in military contexts far more dangerous than high school locker rooms, "I trust everyone is preparing for their next class in an appropriate manner." Tyler's crew dispersed with the practiced efficiency of people who understood when adult oversight made continued harassment inadvisable. But Tyler's final words carried a promise that the day's confrontations were far from over. "See you at lunch, Marcus. We'll continue our conversation then." Third period AP History provided Marcus with an opportunity to process the morning's events and plan his strategy for the escalating conflict. Mr. Kim's lesson focused on resistance movements during World War II, with particular emphasis on how ordinary civilians had organized to oppose systematic oppression through nonviolent but persistent pressure on institutional structures. The most effective resistance movements, Mr. Kim explained, understood that their goal wasn't necessarily to defeat their oppressors through superior force. Their goal was to make the cost of oppression higher than the cost of change, to demonstrate that existing power structures were illegitimate, and to inspire others to join their resistance. Marcus found the lesson remarkably relevant to his current situation. Tyler's power depended on institutional support, social acceptance, and the passive compliance of students who were afraid to challenge his authority. Removing any of those three pillars would destabilize his entire system of control. Amy Rodriguez sat beside him, taking notes with unusual intensity and occasionally showing him messages she was receiving from other students. Word of the morning's confrontations was spreading through social media and text networks, but the narrative was being actively contested by Tyler's supporters who were working to frame Marcus as the aggressor in every interaction. "Look at this," Amy whispered, showing Marcus a group text that she'd apparently been added to without her consent. The conversation included at least 20 participants, all sharing their concerns about Marcus's threatening behavior and the need to protect the school community from potential violence. The messages were sophisticated in their manipulation, mixing legitimate safety concerns with subtle character assassination that painted Marcus as an unstable transfer student with dangerous training and a history of conflict at previous schools. Someone had clearly researched his family's military background and was using that information to suggest he posed a threat to civilian students who lacked his combat training. "Amy, how many of these people have actually interacted with me directly?" Amy scrolled through the participant list, checking names against her mental database of school social networks. "Maybe 5 or 6. The rest are just repeating information they're getting from Tyler's core group or from parents who are connected to his father's business interests." Marcus recognized the information warfare tactics being deployed against him. Tyler was using social media to amplify his narrative beyond the school's immediate population, reaching parents and community members who had no direct knowledge of the actual situation, but were predisposed to trust established authority figures over unknown newcomers. "Amy, I need you to start documenting everything in this chat. Don't participate directly, but save screenshots of every message. We're going to need evidence of how this disinformation campaign is being coordinated. As the class period continued, Marcus received a text from his mother. Heard there were some incidents at school today. Staying late to cover emergency surgery, but Detective Martinez is aware of the situation if you need backup. Be smart, be safe, be proud of who you are. The message reminded Marcus that his actions weren't just affecting his own situation, but potentially creating consequences for his family's standing in the community. Dr. Chen had worked hard to establish herself at Riverside General Hospital, and having a son involved in school conflicts could damage her professional reputation, regardless of who was actually at fault. But Marcus also understood that backing down now would only encourage Tyler to escalate further, potentially targeting other vulnerable students with even more sophisticated methods. The choice wasn't between conflict and peace. It was between standing up to systematic bullying now, or allowing it to continue until someone was seriously harmed. Lunch period arrived with the electric tension of a storm about to break. Marcus had planned to eat in Ms. Parker's classroom, where the English teacher had established an informal safe space for students who preferred quiet discussion to cafeteria social dynamics. But as he walked through the main hallway, he encountered a scene that made his blood run cold with tactical clarity. Danny Foster was surrounded by Tyler's entire crew near the central trophy case, but there was something there, some tension she wasn't naming. Is there anything I should know about the school? Any particular rules or expectations? Dr. Williams's smile became more strained. Riverside High values tradition and school spirit. We're very proud of our athletic programs, especially football. The team's having an exceptional season this year. She stood up, clearly signaling the end of their meeting. Just remember, Marcus, high school can be challenging for transfer students. If you have any problems, any at all, my door is always open. The way she said it made Marcus think her door had been opened by a lot of students who left disappointed. Mrs. Patterson handed him a map of the school and assigned him a student guide. A nervous-looking sophomore named Kevin Thompson, who wore thick glasses and carried his books like he was afraid someone might try to take them. First period is advanced placement history, Kevin said, leading Marcus through hallways that echoed with the sound of slamming lockers and morning conversations. Mr. Kim's class. He's tough but fair. Used to be in the military himself, so he might like you. As they walked, Marcus cataloged the school's geography with the automatic precision his father had trained into him. Main hallway ran north-south, with 3 wings branching off like spokes. The trophy cases dominated the central commons area, filled with decades of football accomplishments and a few token academic awards tucked in the corners. Students moved in predictable patterns, clustering around lockers in groups that told their own stories about social hierarchies and unspoken rules. "That's Tyler Brennan," Kevin whispered, nodding toward a tall, broad-shouldered senior surrounded by a knot of admirers near the main trophy case. Tyler wore his Letterman jacket like armor, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his laugh carrying across the commons with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Football captain. Pretty much runs the school. Marcus watched Tyler for a moment, noting the way other students either gravitated toward him or actively avoided him. There was something in Tyler's posture, the way he claimed space, that set off quiet alarms in Marcus's mind. He'd seen that particular brand of entitlement before, in the sons of officers who thought rank transferred through genetics. "What about him?" Marcus asked, nodding toward a lanky boy with dark hair who was struggling to close his overstuffed locker while juggling an armload of textbooks. Kevin's expression grew uncomfortable. "That's Danny Foster, freshman. Tyler and his friends think he's, entertaining." Kevin adjusted his glasses nervously. "Look, just some advice. Keep your head down around Tyler's crew. They don't like new kids who draw attention." Room 204 turned out to be in the West Wing, past a collection of faded posters advertising long-past school events. Mr. David Kim stood at the front of the classroom, a man in his 60s with silver hair and alert eyes that suggested he missed very little. When Marcus introduced himself, Mr. Kim's handshake was firm and his gaze lingered for a moment longer than casual politeness required. "Marcus Chen," Mr. Kim repeated thoughtfully. "Your father wouldn't happen to be Colonel James Chen, would he?" "Yes, sir. You know him?" Mr. Kim's smile was slight, but genuine. We served in different branches, but paths cross in military circles. He's got a good reputation. He handed Marcus a textbook and gestured toward an empty desk. We're covering the Korean conflict this week. I imagine you might have some insights. The class proceeded with discussions about Cold War politics and the complexities of international intervention. Marcus participated when called upon, but mostly observed his new classmates. There was Amy Rodriguez, a girl with sharp eyes and a reporter's notebook, who seemed to write down everything everyone said. Lisa Chang sat near the window, contributing thoughtful comments when Mr. Kim asked direct questions. Tommy Brooks, who used a wheelchair, had positioned himself strategically near the front where he, gathering that had grown beyond normal hallway interactions. Her expression as she surveyed the scene suggested she was beginning to understand that her carefully maintained school harmony had been built on a foundation of systematic injustice that was finally being exposed. "What's going on here?" Dr. Williams demanded, but her tone lacked its usual authority. Amy Rodriguez stepped forward with journalistic professionalism that transformed the entire dynamic of the situation. "Dr. Williams, we're documenting student testimony about systematic harassment and institutional failures to address criminal behavior. Would you like to comment on the school's anti-bullying policies and how they're being implemented?" The question was delivered with perfect courtesy, but its implications were unmistakable. The story was no longer contained within Riverside High School's walls or subject to administrative control. It was becoming public record, subject to scrutiny by parents, media, and potentially law enforcement. Tyler made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative, but his voice carried the desperation of someone whose world was collapsing around him. "Dr. Williams, Marcus Chen has been systematically provoking conflicts and creating disruptions since he arrived here. These videos are taken out of context to make legitimate student leadership look like harassment." Dr. Williams looked from Tyler to Marcus to the crowd of students with recording equipment, clearly realizing that her next words would be preserved and analyzed far beyond her ability to control their interpretation. "I think we need to move this discussion to my office immediately." "Actually," Amy said, her phone still recording, "I think the community deserves to see how these discussions proceed." Transparency in educational institutions is crucial for maintaining public trust. Marcus understood that Amy was forcing Dr. Williams to choose between conducting a fair investigation in public view or appearing to protect Tyler through private processes that could be characterized as cover-up attempts. Either choice would expose the school's previous failures to address systematic bullying. The crowd was growing larger as word spread through social media and text networks. Parents were beginning to arrive, summoned by their children's messages about significant events unfolding at school. Marcus recognized Janet Foster, Danny's mother, approaching with the determined stride of someone prepared to fight for her child's safety and dignity. Other parents followed, their expressions ranging from concern to anger to confusion as they tried to understand what was happening and how it might affect their own children. But Marcus also noticed parents whose expressions suggested they'd been expecting something like this for years, people who had watched Tyler's behavior with growing concern but felt powerless to challenge his family's influence. Tyler's father arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by urgent texts from his son and probably from school staff, who understood that the situation had moved beyond their ability to contain or control. Dean Pierce stepped out of his luxury sedan wearing a suit that cost more than most families spent on clothing in a year, his expression radiating the kind of confidence that came from never doubting his ability to manage any situation through influence and intimidation. "What seems to be the problem here?" Dean Pierce asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Amy Rodriguez's response was immediate and devastating. "Mr. Pierce, I'm Amy Rodriguez with the Riverside High School newspaper. We're investigating allegations of systematic harassment involving your son and other students. The evidence includes security footage of criminal vandalism and recorded threats against vulnerable students. Would you care to comment on your son's behavior and the school's response to multiple complaints over several years?" Dean Pierce's expression shifted as he realized this wasn't a simple disciplinary matter that could be resolved through back-channel influence and intimidation. This was a public relations crisis that required careful damage control, with documentation that could potentially expose his family to legal liability. "I think there may be some misunderstandings here," Dean Pierce said carefully. Tyler is a natural leader who sometimes faces criticism from students who don't appreciate his efforts to maintain school traditions and values. Danny Foster's voice cut through the crowd noise with startling clarity, stronger than Marcus had ever heard it before. "Mr. Pierce, is destroying my locker a school tradition? Is threatening to hurt me a school value? Is teaching other students that they can target anyone they perceive as weak part of the leadership your son is providing?" The questions hung in the air like accusations that demanded response. Dean Pierce looked at his son, clearly expecting Tyler to provide a reasonable explanation that could diffuse the allegations. But Tyler's usual smooth confidence had abandoned him completely under the weight of documented evidence and public scrutiny. "Dad, they're lying," Tyler said, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "They're making this up because they're jealous of our success and position in the school." "Tyler," Dr. Williams interrupted, "we have security footage of the locker vandalism. We have documentation of multiple incidents over several years. This isn't about jealousy or misunderstandings." Marcus realized that the principal had been conducting her own investigation, probably prompted by the accumulating evidence that could no longer be ignored or rationalized away. Dr. Williams might have been reluctant to challenge Tyler's behavior initially, but institutional self-preservation now demanded that she take action to protect the school from legal liability. The crowd continued growing, as more parents arrived and students with free periods gathered to witness what was clearly a historic moment in Riverside High School's culture. Marcus noticed teachers joining the crowd as well, including Ms. Parker and Mr. Kim, whose presence suggested that faculty support for change was stronger than Tyler's influence network had recognized. Connor Walsh attempted damage control by pulling out his phone and starting to delete social media posts and text messages, but Amy Rodriguez was already documenting his actions. "Connor, deleting evidence might not be the best strategy right now. Digital forensics can recover deleted material, and destruction of evidence can be considered obstruction of justice in criminal investigations." The observation sent a wave of panic through Tyler's crew as they realized their exposure extended beyond school discipline to potential legal consequences. Derek Santos approached Danny Foster with what appeared to be a sincere apology, clearly trying to distance himself from Tyler's leadership before facing serious repercussions. Tyler made one final attempt to regain control through direct confrontation, stepping toward Marcus with the aggressive posture that had intimidated students for years. "You think you've won something here? You think this changes anything? You have no idea what you've started or what it's going to cost you." Marcus met Tyler's advance with the calm stillness his father had taught him for dealing with desperate opponents who had nothing left to lose. "Tyler, you're right that I've started something. But I know exactly what it is and exactly what it's going to cost. The question is whether you understand what it's going to cost you." The confrontation reached its climax when Tyler, driven by desperation and humiliation, made the mistake Marcus had been expecting since their first encounter. In front of dozens of witnesses with recording equipment, Tyler raised his hand in a gesture that was unmistakably threatening, crossing the line from verbal intimidation to assault. Marcus's response demonstrated everything his father had taught him about proportional force and tactical restraint. Instead of striking back or escalating the physical confrontation, he simply stepped aside and allowed Tyler's momentum to carry him into an off-balance position, where his threatening gesture became an embarrassing stumble that required Marcus's assistance to prevent an actual fall. "Careful there," Marcus said mildly, steadying Tyler with a grip that demonstrated complete control without causing pain or injury. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." The exchange was captured by multiple cameras from various angles, providing indisputable evidence that Marcus had used minimum necessary force to defend himself while protecting Tyler from the consequences of his own aggressive behavior. The footage would later become a training video for de-escalation techniques in conflict resolution programs. Tyler's humiliation was complete as he realized that his attempt at physical intimidation had only demonstrated his inferiority to someone with superior training and self-control. His followers had largely abandoned him as the scope of potential consequences became apparent, and even his father was looking at him with obvious disappointment and calculation. Dr. Williams finally asserted administrative authority, but her timing suggested she'd been waiting for Tyler to discredit himself completely before taking action. "Tyler Brennan, you are suspended pending a full investigation into allegations of harassment, vandalism, and assault. Your parents will be contacted to discuss potential criminal charges and civil liability." The announcement was met with mixed reactions from the crowd. Some students cheered, others looked shocked, and a few seemed nervous about the implications for their own behavior if standards were suddenly being applied consistently. But the overall atmosphere was one of relief, as if a weight that had been pressing down on the entire school community had finally been lifted. Amy Rodriguez continued her documentation, interviewing students who had been victimized by Tyler's crew and teachers who had felt powerless to challenge his behavior without administrative support. Her footage would later become the foundation for a comprehensive investigation that exposed systematic failures extending far beyond Tyler's individual actions. Dean Pierce attempted to minimize the damage to his family's reputation by suggesting that Tyler was a troubled teenager who needed help rather than punishment. But his words carried little conviction in the face of documented evidence and community testimony. The power structure that had protected Tyler for years was collapsing, as parents and community members realized they could no longer ignore or rationalize behavior that had been escalating unchecked. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same hallway where Tyler had conducted his pseudo-tribunal, but the atmosphere was completely different. The trophy cases still displayed Riverside High School's athletic achievements, but new displays had been added, celebrating academic accomplishments and community service projects that had previously been overshadowed by sports culture. Danny Foster walked through the building with confidence that would have been unimaginable a month earlier. He'd been elected to the student council on a platform of peer advocacy and conflict resolution, working with Amy Rodriguez to establish systems that would prevent future students from facing the isolation and harassment he'd experienced. Tyler Brennan had transferred to a private military academy whose strict discipline structure promised to address his behavioral issues through methods his father considered more appropriate than civilian counseling and legal consequences. His crew had dispersed, with some members like Derek Santos working actively to repair relationships with students they'd previously targeted. Coach Miller had announced his retirement, citing health concerns that coincidentally emerged after the school board's investigation into his handling of student complaints revealed a pattern of enabling harassment through willful blindness and selective enforcement of rules. His replacement was a former Marine who emphasized character development and mutual respect over traditional hierarchies. In there, Coach Miller likes students who show respect for authority. Seems like you've got plenty of experience with that conversation. Tyler's laugh was genuine this time. Fair point. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. This place has its rhythms, its traditions. Fight against them, and you'll have a miserable time. Work with them, he shrugged. Well, let's just say Riverside can be a great place for the right kind of student. They had reached the main hallway, where afternoon classes were about to begin. Students flowed around them in the practiced chaos of period changes, but Marcus noticed how many gave Tyler a wide berth, how conversations quieted when he passed. What about Danny Foster? Marcus asked. Where does he fit into these traditions? Tyler's expression hardened slightly. Danny's learning important life lessons about resilience and adaptation. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them figure things out for themselves. And if they can't figure it out, then maybe they weren't meant to succeed here. Tyler's voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned his own advantages. Look, Marcus, I'm trying to be straight with you because I respect what your father does for our country. But everyone has to find their place in the ecosystem. Some people are predators, some are prey. It's not personal, it's just nature. The second half of the school day passed in a blur of introductory lessons and social navigation. In advanced biology, Marcus found himself partnered with Lisa Chang, a quiet girl who seemed genuinely interested in helping him catch up on the material they'd covered before his arrival. She spoke softly, but with precision, walking him through cellular respiration diagrams with the patience of someone who understood what it felt like to be overlooked. Thanks for this, Marcus said as they worked through practice problems. I know getting stuck with the new kid isn't exactly exciting. Lisa glanced around nervously before responding. Actually, I volunteered. Miss Parker asked if anyone wanted to help you get oriented and she hesitated, then continued in an even quieter voice. I saw what happened in the cafeteria. It was brave. It was stupid. Maybe, Lisa agreed. But someone needed to do something stupid. Danny's a good kid. He doesn't deserve what Tyler puts him through. Marcus looked up from his textbook. You've seen this before? Lisa's expression became carefully neutral. Everyone's seen it. The question is whether anyone's going to do anything about it. In English class, Ms. Jennifer Parker proved to be exactly the kind of teacher Marcus had hoped to find at Riverside. She was probably in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes and the slightly harried appearance of someone who cared more about her students than her own convenience. Her classroom was a refuge of books and thoughtful discussion, posters promoting critical thinking and empathy covering walls that had probably once displayed more conventional academic motivations. "We're starting a unit on moral courage in literature," Ms. Parker announced to the class. "We'll be reading texts that explore what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous." Tommy Brooks, the student who used a wheelchair, raised his hand. "Are we talking about heroes? Like in action movies?" Ms. Parker smiled. "That's exactly what we're going to examine, Tommy. The difference between Hollywood heroism and real moral courage. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is speak truth to power, even when you know there will be consequences." Amy Rodriguez, who Marcus was beginning to realize attended every class with the intensity of an investigative journalist, leaned forward in her seat. "What about when the power structure doesn't want to hear the truth? What about when speaking up makes things worse for everyone?" "Excellent question, Amy. That's precisely the kind of complexity we'll be exploring. Moral courage isn't simple or easy. If it were, everyone would practice it." As the discussion continued, Marcus found himself thinking about the morning's events, about Tyler's casual assertion that some people were predators and others prey, about Coach Miller's willingness to see leadership where others might see intimidation. The classroom felt like a different world from the rest of the school, a place where difficult questions were encouraged rather than discouraged. After class, Miss Parker asked Marcus to stay behind. When the other students had filed out, she closed the door and turned to face him with an expression that suggested she'd been planning this conversation. "How was your first day, Marcus?" "Educational," he replied, unconsciously echoing his response to Amy at lunch. Miss Parker smiled wryly. "I imagine it was. Word travels fast in a school this size. I heard there was some excitement in the cafeteria." Marcus waited, unsure how much she knew or what her position might be on the incident. "I want you to know," Miss Parker continued, "that my classroom is a safe space. If you ever need to talk about anything, my door is open. And I mean that literally. I'm here until 5 most days, grading papers and preparing lessons." "Thanks. I appreciate that." Miss Parker hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Marcus, I'm going to share something with you that I probably shouldn't. This school has some wonderful students and dedicated teachers, but it also has some systemic problems that have been ignored for too long. Students like Danny Foster often fall through the cracks, and students like Tyler Brennan learn that their actions don't have consequences. Why are you telling me this? Because you're new, which means you don't have years of learned helplessness built up. And because your response in the cafeteria suggests you might be someone who refuses to accept that this is just how things are." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Change is hard, Marcus. It requires people willing to take risks, to challenge the status quo. But change is also necessary." As Marcus walked to his locker at the end of the day, he reflected on Miss Parker's words and their implications. The hallways were emptying as students headed to after-school activities or home. But the building still hummed with energy. He could hear the marching band practicing in the distance, the sound of basketballs echoing from the gymnasium, the normal soundtrack of American high school life. His locker was in the sophomore hallway, a location that had probably been assigned randomly but felt strategically unfortunate given the day's events. As he gathered his books, he became aware of voices approaching from around the corner. Tyler's voice, unmistakable in its confident cadence, along with the deeper tones of his usual companions. "Think he's some kind of tough guy because his daddy plays soldier," Tyler was saying. "But this isn't Afghanistan or wherever. This is Ohio, and Ohio has different rules." Marcus continued organizing his backpack, but his father's training kicked in automatically, cataloging exit routes and potential threats. The voices were getting closer. "Maybe we should back off for a while," a voice that sounded like Derek Santos suggested nervously. Coach Miller seemed pretty serious about keeping things calm. Tyler's laugh was sharp. "Coach Miller wants to win football games. As long as we're winning on Friday nights, he doesn't really care what happens Monday through Thursday. Trust me, I've been managing Coach Miller since I was a freshman. They rounded the corner then, Tyler leading his usual entourage of Jake Morrison, Connor Walsh, and Derek Santos. When Tyler saw Marcus at his locker, his expression shifted to one of pleasant surprise. "Marcus, perfect timing. We were just talking about you." Marcus closed his locker and turned to face them, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, absolutely. I was just telling the guys how impressed I was with your restraint earlier. Very mature, very disciplined. Your father's training really shows." The compliment felt like a trap, but Marcus couldn't identify the specific danger yet. "Thanks." Connor Walsh stepped forward. His expensive clothing and carefully styled hair,